United Lutheran Seminary presents the Seminary Explores podcast, conversations on faith, art, people, politics, theology, life, and more, with voices from around the corner and around the globe.
Good day. Welcome to the Seminary Explores. My name is Nelson Strobert, and today my guest is Dr. Maria Erling, Professor of Modern Church History and Global Mission at United Lutheran Seminary. Welcome to the Seminary Explores.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you.
Right. Well, we're here, or I wanted to talk with you as you share your thoughts on the 200th anniversary of United Lutheran Seminary. And I'm going to jump right into it and ask you, how did the seminary begin?
Well, it began in 1826, and that was such a year of beginnings because it was also the 50th anniversary of the Revolution. So we are now in the 250th for the American Revolution, and the seminary's beginning coincided with the first celebration of that. And it was a new country, and there were new institutions that were being formed. And in the 1820s, many colleges and seminaries were forming across the country because of the real need to educate people for ministry and for law and for medicine. There were three professions that were necessary to have separate schools for. That was just starting in the beginning of the 19th century. Because before that, everybody would be tutored by a professional in their home, with a group of students, other students. Somebody would do a college course or academy course, and then they'd study for law with a lawyer, with a minister for ministry. And these would be approved instructors. And Samuel Simon Schmucker, who began our seminary, was one of these. And he was a very recent graduate of one of the very first seminaries in the country, Princeton Theological Seminary. There weren't any Lutheran theological seminaries when he wanted to study. There was one that started a few years before Gettysburg in Hartwick Seminary. And that one was a small seminary that was supported by congregations in New York. But there wasn't anything from the large Maryland Synod and the Pennsylvania Lutherans, which were the very big group of Lutherans, had been really so conflicted over whether theological education should happen in German or should it happen in English. And this had really balled up things so much that finally Samuel Simon Schmucker and other supporters said, we're going ahead and we're not waiting for the Pennsylvania Ministerium to figure this out. So there's a lot more to say about that.
There's one thing so in terms of Lutheran congregations in Pennsylvania, did the pastors then come from Germany?
Some did. And then to educate them, the University of Pennsylvania had a theological professor, Helmut, and we have his portrait here at the seminary. And he was the instructor for Samuel Simon Schmucker and for his father. He was really elderly by the time that Schmucker, the younger Schmucker, took his classes with him or his instruction. And then he went to Princeton. So he was a young man who studied how the Princeton Seminary was organized. The other piece to bring in was in the new country, religion was based on voluntarism, meaning people paid for this themselves, the congregations. They would volunteer to serve. That's where the term voluntary. It's not an establishment church,
right,
like paid for by taxes, and there's no provision for the establishment of religion. So this was a time of learning how to fund and to build institutions from the grassroots. It was also a time of a lot of organizing for moral reform and for other social movements. So temperance was one of them. Anti-slavery was another one. Sabbath movements were another. Sunday school, public school.
Right.
They were trying to get rid of all sorts of hygiene movements. There were so many of them. There was cemetery movements, and people would be very excited about trying to refine the country and to start better educational systems. These are all very activist things.
Yeah.
To get people. And the German culture was not like that, and the Lutheran culture was not like that. Their attitude about this was, we are going to stick to the gospel, we're going to stick to preaching the profound depths of the thoughts of the Bible and our performers, while in English, they were very moved by the more activist approach to life and building, and thought that the churches should also be involved in these social reform movements.
I was about to say, Simon Schmucker then takes on this American attitude.
Yes, and so his approach to it got the smear name American Lutheranism instead of Lutheranism, which was. But for so long, the authorities in the colonies had wanted to start a theological seminary, a school for training Lutheran ministers, and the assumption was that this was be in Philadelphia. Muhlenberg had, even in the 1700s, had purchased land for this effect. But because they couldn't agree on the instruction, and because the German supporters didn't believe in higher education for their ministers, or at least they didn't believe they should have to pay for it.
Right, okay.
Or something like that. So for a while, there was a special commission in this oldest synod. It was called the Pennsylvania Ministerium, or it was called the Pennsylvania Synod, depending on how they met. So it can be confusing for newcomers to Lutheran history. They thought they'll work together with the German Reformed and put up a seminary in Lancaster.
Okay.
But then they came on the rocks with that, and that didn't work out. And so they had some money that they gave to the new upstart General Synod, which was what Schmucker had started in 1820. He'd been part of starting that, because you can't start a seminary unless you have a church body that's going to support you. So they got off the ground. He brought his students that he'd had down in Newmarket, Virginia, up to Gettysburg. He made arrangements for his second wife's servants, enslaved people, to come along to keep her in the manner in which she was accustomed, I think.
Huh.
But he didn't use language like that. I'm using language like that. But his correspondence with her was how this could happen by bringing her from her family, which had a number of these enslaved persons, to pick some that were younger and would be able to come to Gettysburg under the emancipation laws that were in Pennsylvania, where if you are enslaved, you have until you're 28, and then if you've been freed. So what he did was indentured these enslaved persons once they came here, and they stayed, but they ended up staying with the family even after that time, and continued to work in the family. So there were 3 of them.
Okay, so you talk about the establishment of the seminary in 1826, but for those outside of the Lutheran Church or Lutheran history, we see that there came to be 2 Lutheran seminaries in Pennsylvania. How did that occur?
Well, this old Pennsylvania ministerium that I was telling you about, that was sort of wary and not in charge, and they didn't like the fact that Samuel Simon Schmucker had kind of leapt over their provisions for there being just a German instruction or all of these conservative. They should have been in the lead, but they weren't. So you had a kind of disruptive young Schmucker coming along to start this American seminary, American Lutheran Seminary. Well, they came back on board, this Pennsylvania ministerium, after a 30-year absence of support, and they said, we will be a part of the seminary after 1853, and our money is going to go to pay for a German professor at the college down the street,
Okay.
and at the seminary, because they felt that they were not keeping up with the tide of German immigration coming to the United States, which they also felt as a matter of pride that they should be in charge of leading. But this is when the Missouri Synod showed up and a number of other very conservative groups that came to the Midwest who would not take pastors from the General Synod or this American Lutheranism. They looked at what the activism, they looked at the comfort with a sort of evangelical pan-Protestantism that the American Lutherans were comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And they said, that's not Lutheranism. Lutheranism is very strictly bringing to life the confessional documents of the 16th century. Meanwhile, some of the seminary graduates, the graduate Charles Porterfield Krauth, his father, Charles Philip Krauth, had been the president of the college and a theological professor at Gettysburg as a colleague of Schmucker's. His son, Charles Porterfield Krauth, and Schmucker's son, Beal Melanchthon Schmucker, carried on a correspondence and a commitment to reading the historic theology of Lutheranism. And they, in this exchange of their letters and meetings, they would meet for a week in one of the parsonages and really go over the Lutheran confessions. And they became convinced that there needed to be a complete refreshing of theological life within the Lutheran Church, and that Lutheranism, American Lutheranism, was going to lose its distinction and its identity if it didn't really attend to this. So they started a journal. They wrote a lot of historical articles. They were not, at least they didn't say anything about how they felt about slavery except in very private correspondence. They started newspaper too, and they began to really get to know some of the Midwestern Swedish and German groups who also had been influenced by this neo-confessionalist movement. So things really came to a boil during the Civil War. The first thing that happened is the Augustana Synod was formed, and their name, Augustana, is one of the names for the Augsburg Confession.
Augustana, I think of Swedish Lutherans.
Yes, but they picked the name August. They were in the General Synod.
Okay.
And they didn't agree confessionally with the American Lutherans. They had other influences. So they left the General Synod in 1860. Then you have the Southern Lutherans who leave the General Synod also because of the outbreak of the war. So you have a dilution of what had been a rather robust component of more traditional Lutheran theology from the General Synod. So that left a sort of a steadfast portion of this group, led by Charles Porterfield Krauth, who felt that, no, we need to really think about leaving the General Synod. Now, the next thing that happens is one of the Frankian Synod petitions to join the General Synod.
You say Frankian Synod. Who were they?
They were in upstate New York, and they were an abolitionist synod. They were against slavery. They refused to have any countenance or any association or fellowship with any church that had slaveholders in it.
Okay.
So as soon as the southern part of Lutheranism broke away during the Civil War, the Frankian Synod now didn't have any principled reasons not to join or petition to join. But when they made their request, they did not, they had not yet subscribed to the Augsburg Confession. Okay, so the General Synod said, sure, you can join on the condition that at your next meeting you would subscribe to the Augsburg. And they promised to do this. That was not enough for the Pennsylvania ministerium, who left. And then they took their German professor with them, and they said, we're starting a new seminary. And that was in the July of 1864. And that started Philadelphia Seminary. They went to that city, and they took with them 4 students from the Gettysburg Seminary, the German professor, and they took up a camp in a bookstore and began their seminary in that September.
Oh, that's a fascinating history.
So
a lot of intrigue.
There are a lot of factors that are part of it.
Right.
There's the theological development of a Lutheran identity. There's the German culture issue. There's a lot of anxiety in that whole system. They go to the one church that had actually gone to court to prevent English services from ever being done in their sanctuary.
Wow.
Okay. And so then there was also this idea of what role did the social reform movements have in this whole, it was sort of like those social reform activities and worship services that were not as liturgical as Lutherans might want to go along with that. Probably a different kind of preaching. I think there's one historian that I think really put the nail on the head about what were the Protestants in Gettysburg up to, and he talked about the Lutherans. They were a part of what he called the culture of refinement, so that when you would preach and teach in your congregation, you would expect the congregants to become more educated, more, maybe it would be like maybe behaving a little bit better, improving their morals, having a literary culture in the way that they interacted. Exactly. And that wasn't German culture. That was more of an American thing.
Okay. Now, as I said before, you've been writing this history, and as you've been writing, are there personalities? You mentioned Krauth, and Schmucker, but are there other personalities that have jumped out to you as you've been writing, or surprised you?
Okay, so let's do a surprise. There was a man named Frank Buckman, who was a graduate of the Philadelphia Seminary. He'd come from Muhlenberg College, and he started a movement called Buckmanism. And he was very much a people guy, and he was one who would gather around him all the most prominent people and network with them. And he had what he called house parties. And he trained people how to detect the guidance of the Spirit in their lives, what they should be doing next. Okay, so he was widely admired. It was kind of like a trend let's think, just before the First World War gets started, and it kind of goes all the way through into the Nazi period. Oh, where he goes over to England, and he starts what he called Oxford groups. They're not the same as the Oxford movement. It's Oxford groups. These get changed into something called the Moral Rearmament movement, and it leads into Alcoholics Anonymous. He is one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh, my.
So he's an interesting person, and he's not particularly an exemplar of the confessionalism of the Philadelphia world. Okay, so this is an interesting character that way. And there are, again, the Pennsylvania Ministerium almost kicked him off their clergy roster for not showing up ever at any conventions or having communed. And I have seen correspondence from one of his friends saying, you just have to come to the service and commune, and then you'll be fine. And you would not be disciplined by the ministerium. But he didn't have time for that. Then in the 30s, he got, so that he thought, well, there's something to this Hitler. He's really changing the moral character of the German people. And so he was positive at the very beginning about the Nazi movement. So I think he saw things on the surface in a way that is not the same spirit that we've always thought Philadelphia would have had.
Exactly.
The deep sounding, the deep grunt, and all of that. A person from Gettysburg that I find quite interesting, of course, I think Abdul Ross Wentz is quite a character. He was.
Could you say something about that? 'Cause I remember seeing him when I was a student on the Gettysburg campus.
Yeah,
going to the lectures, etc.
Oh, what a personality he was! Very, very fine person. I didn't know him but my husband's family knew him very, very well. I want to talk about how he brought Bertha Paulssen here.
Please.
Okay, so I think that was innovative. He had gone to Leipzig to study after he finished his seminary course, and he did what used to be the way people would prepare for being professors, and they would go to different universities in Germany and go to lectures by theologians, and they would maybe go around to several places. But he latched on to Leipzig and got to know some of the leading Lutheran European figures, so that he was pretty well networked. He went there in 1923 and participated in some of the international gatherings of Lutherans, so that he became very proficient in understanding how the different parties of Lutheranism around the world were interacting with each other, and he had built up a good network. So he's sort of like Frank Buckman that way, of having this network of people. He then, when the war broke out, or when the Nazis took over in 1933, Bertha Paulssen had been a social worker, studied in Leipzig. She did a dissertation on the way that mechanical impulses affected personalities. And so she was interested in industrialization and military sounds and impulses. And so that became a job in social work. She supervised 800 social workers in an institution.
Oh, my.
But they were working with people who had disabilities of some sort or who were differently abled. And so with the Nazi party coming on, they weren't going to fund that kind of work. So she became a refugee at that point and came to New York and started to consider working with the settlement house movement, other things in the city. And she met Mildred Winston, who was a major organizer of the ULCA, the Lutheran Church, work with college students and with women. And Mildred networked her with the deaconesses and other places where women were being trained. So for a while she did some of that work, and then she taught at Thiel College on Staten Island. But there was not Thiel College, I mean Wagner, on Staten Island. But students there was pro-Nazi groups all around Staten Island, and they had latched on to this German. And so they were very belligerent, and the students at Wagner College said, you're not really safe here. So from there, Wentz, who was also, of course, Winston helped out, but Wentz said, okay, I think there's an opportunity here for her to teach here at Gettysburg.
Wow.
So she came and started to teach the seminarians about understanding the social context for where they were, right? And how that might affect their public ministry. So you can see that emphasis of being aware of how social work and a social consciousness is necessary for ministry.
Exactly.
And that what's coming at us from our experience is very important to take into account for your ministry.
Exactly.
And she was the first woman theological professor in a Lutheran seminary ever in this country. So, and she was not trained theologically.
Right, exactly.
So this was a very much an innovative response to a real difficult situation.
And from what I have heard and seen, her students, carried on that tradition of looking at context and ministry, and influenced, many departments within the church.
Yeah, I think that we wouldn't have had a distinctive Lutheran voice in urban ministry if it had not been for what she brought to it. So I think Bertha Paulssen is a very significant new start for this seminary, and I think that Abdul Ross Wentz, somebody who's a leader and sees something that is a possibility and acts on it. He was also that way about the chapel. It's during the war. He's going, we need a chapel here. We need a distinctive chapel. So he does the construction of our remarkable building in there.
Exactly.
And he brings to it this kind of American sensibility to it, which I think was very, very shrewd.
Yeah, I can't believe that our time is almost over.
I was thinking we've gotten through the first 100 years.
That's right. But I need to ask you this, and that is, as you've been writing and reflecting, what do you see as the challenges for seminaries in general and for United Lutheran Seminary in particular?
Well, I think that especially we need to have more of a voice in public. I think that sanctuaries are fine, and a place to be consoled is a very important part of ministry. I think that since I was in ministry and began to do all this work in pastoral theology and CPE, which really formed so much of the callings with so many of our students too, there is a sense in which the individual pastoral care has been very well developed in ministry in our country.
Right.
And the other aspects of ministry, the teaching, the preaching, the community engagement, has been less developed in the attention of a church. Mm-hmm. So I think that when I compare the different eras of the seminary,
yes,
and I think about the involvements of our graduates all over that 200-year span, I see so many of the innovative, creative moments being outward directed. And I think that is the purpose of a theological education, is to serve people, whether or not they're part of the congregation or whether or not it's on your list of people to call. It's not only an individual relationship that a pastor has, but also a responsibility of the community.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving this broad history in a matter of minutes for our listening audience. Today, my guest has been Dr. Maria Erling, Professor of Modern Church History and Global Mission at United Lutheran Seminary, and who's been involved in writing a history of the seminary. So we look forward to its publication. And so for the Seminary Explorers, this is Nelson Strobert. Have a good day.
You have been listening to The Seminary Explorers, a production of United Lutheran Seminary with campuses in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We invite you to visit our website at unitedlutheranseminary.edu. All opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of United Lutheran Seminary or the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.